and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast, where we invite you to spend a few minutes with the staff here at Cook Library. I'm Nate Goss, one of the librarians, and I'm here once again with Reader's Advisor Joe, who is going to give us some reading suggestions. Welcome back, Joe.
Thanks, Nate.
So the Olympics are just beginning to wind down a little bit in Rio this week, but I, for one, have really been enjoying these games. There's just something about the Olympics that brings out some of the best drama and stories of achievement and overcoming the odds. So, Joe, with the Olympics in mind, do you have a good book recommendation for others like me who have been swept up in these games?
I do, matter of fact. I would like to recommend The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. My book club at Cook Memorial Library just did this book last week, and they all loved the book. And I just thought I wanted to make sure our listeners knew about it.
So this is a book it's nonfiction, right?
Correct.
Can you maybe just tell us a little bit what the book is about? Sure.
It's about the 1936 gold medal men's 8-oar rowing team. And the United States won the gold medal that year when the Olympics were held in Berlin and at the Nazi Olympics. And the team is made up of poor sons of farmers and loggers and miners, and they all went to Washington State University. And rowing has always been traditionally an elite sport for rich people. It was always, done at Yale and Harvard, and of course where it originated in Oxford and England. So for these very poor, down and out young men to win the gold medal out of Washington State, it was quite an achievement.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a real underdog type story.
Very much so. And what's nice about the book is they go into the stories of these boys, but especially one in particular. His name is Joe Rance. Joe grew up really in a tough situation. His mother died when he was young. His father remarried, and his new wife didn't like Joe. And it happened that when he was 10, they abandoned him. They just left him. And so he stayed at the local schoolhouse, and the school teacher let him stay there as long as he cut firewood to keep the schoolhouse warm. This is a 10-year-old, mind you. And so this kid started chopping wood, and this made him very strong, And then he ended up growing, and he ended up being like a 6'4" guy. And eventually, when he was in school, he was discovered by the rowing team coach at Washington State when he was in high school. And so Joe had an opportunity to go to the University of Washington, which he wanted to do because he wanted to be an engineer someday. But his main thing why he wanted to go to Washington is he would get a couple meals a day. Because this is during the Great Depression. And he, was always looking for food because he was raising himself. And it's just incredible,
Yeah, it almost sounds like, the premise for a movie that you would see, just the details are so, like you couldn't make this stuff up. It almost sounds almost too cliche, but then it's real life,
It's so true, and I wish they would make a movie. I mean, PBS has done a documentary about this amazing rowing team, but I think it would be a great movie.
So the author of this book is
Daniel James Brown.
Daniel James Brown. Now, is he mostly a history writer? Could you tell us a little bit about the author at all?
Yes, he generally writes history nonfiction books. But what was really interesting is how he came about to write this book. He was going to a homeowners association meeting, and a neighbor came up to him and said, my father, who's, almost 90 years old, really liked your last book, and he would really like to meet you. And he said, sure, I'll come on over. And he went to the neighbor's house. And it turned out it's Joe Rance who read his book.
Oh, really?
The guy. And he was dying at this point. Okay. He's very old. He's, like in his 90s. So he meets Joe Rance, and Joe starts telling him about his life. And the author finds out that Rance had this amazing life, and he starts reminiscing about winning the gold medal, and this incredible story comes out. So Brown spent several months interviewing Joe, and then he also spent a lot of time interviewing his family, and then he started researching more and more about this Olympics. and learn more about the other rowers. And all of them had died except Joe and one other one. And so Brown went back and interviewed their family members and went through all the Washington University's documents to learn more about rowing. He didn't know anything about rowing before this. And then he ended up researching the Nazi Olympics in 1936. And he goes into that in the book. It's really fascinating because Hitler wanted Berlin to be just so like a utopia. People would come and think it's beautiful.
Well, this is the rise of Nazi Germany. This is when Hitler actually... I'm trying to remember what the year was that Hitler was like Times Man of the Year. You know?
It was right around then. And I think because the Olympics are going on, everyone thought, whoa, Berlin is so wonderful, and these Nazis aren't so bad.
Yeah.
And this is when they went, before the Olympics, they rounded up all the gypsies and moved them out. Anyone who was poor or homeless was rounded up. They were starting to get rid of the Jews living in Berlin.
They had an image they were trying to sell.
Yes.
And anyone who didn't fit that image was,
And if you were an Aryan, you're not welcome.
Yeah.
And, of course, this is the famous Olympics that Jesse Owens won.
I was just going to say, this is Olympics. When you think of the 1936 Olympics, you think Nazis and you think Jesse Owens.
And 4 gold medals.
And you never hear much about this rowing team, so it's really fascinating that this whole thing just kind of happened. This ragtag team wins the gold for the USA,
And it was such a long shot. They had so many obstacles to overcome. And when you learn about all their lives and the tough times they had and how hard it was even to make the final rowing team for the Olympics and then getting there. And they even had obstacles right up to the very end. I don't want to give away too much, but, right up to the very end. It's just a great story. And if you like this time period and you like underdog stories, you really should check out Boys in the Boat.
Now, when you think of, exciting sports, if I'm being honest, I don't know that rowing necessarily comes to mind right away. You think boxing or football or, something with a lot of contact. And so what does Brown do to make something like rowing compelling to maybe those of us who maybe never had any interest in the sport or just know very little about it?
He really goes into the science of rowing, even as far as how they made the boats back then. They were all handmade by wood, and this one Englishman made them all meticulously. And of course, now they're not made of wood anymore, but everything had to be exact. And if you messed up one row, it would screw up the whole boat. And they had to flow as one when they were rowing. Kind of like, you compare an orchestra. If one musician wasn't playing right, it didn't sound right. The whole orchestra didn't sound right. And that's how Joe Rance was talking about how rowing was such a great thing when it was done right. You just felt like you got lost in it.
In the rhythm of it.
In the rhythm of it. Yeah. So, I know more about rowing now than I ever did.
Well, and this book actually came out a few years ago. 2013, I think,
was
the publication date. So, what do you think makes it endure?
And it's so popular at the library still. It's going out for book clubs, and people keep hearing about it word of mouth because, it's not a famous book. And I think that's what makes it great because people are talking about it and say, oh, you should really read this book. And I think because it's just such a really good story, and the fact that it's true makes it even better. And I generally don't read a lot of nonfiction. I'm a fiction reader, but this I really enjoyed because it reads almost like a novel.
I keep thinking of the title, The Boys in the Boat. It's not the award-winning athletes in the rowing competition. Or, do you think that, I don't know if the title has specific significance or if it is just sort of selling this idea of this team that no one really had any expectations for.
Well, and then when they were talking about the young men, these are young men, like, 18, 19, 20, but in the book they always called them boys. And it's funny because they really were grown up because
they're college.
They're college age and they're self-sufficient and they had to fend for themselves. But yet the coaches always called them the boys. And I think that's where the author picked it up, The Boys in the Boat.
It sounds like a great read and a great pick, especially around this time of year with the Olympics going on and everything. So I just want to thank you, Joe, for recommending such a fascinating book for everyone to read.
Oh, you're welcome. Check it out.
So if you want to read The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown, just look for it in our catalog, which can be found on our website, www.cooklib.org. We have The Boys in the Boat available in regular, large type, CD audiobook, ebook, and e-audiobook. We even have a version of the book adapted for younger readers. And actually, while you're there looking at the catalog, Joe wrote up a book review of Boys in the Boat recently on our Shelf Life blog. That's the library's blog. We will link to that review in our show notes, so be sure to check that out. That blog's address is shelflife.cooklib.org. If you ever want to get in touch and leave some feedback about the podcast, shoot us an email. Webmaster@cooklib.org is the email address for that. If you enjoy this podcast, keep spreading the word, and we also encourage you to leave us a good rating on iTunes. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.